Hey friends, opening up the SC7 video style once again. We'll try to make this a quick one so we can get you ready to enjoy the week of Jazz basketball. Although, wow, what a week we just experienced. Not only were the Jazz winless since our last SC7, but overall they've lost 5 in a row, all by double figures. Lauri Markkanen played in just 2 of those games. Jordan Clarkson hasn't played in any. Now there's a suspension coming. The Jazz defense has been MIA. In short, it hasn't been the most fun week, the most enjoyable week of Jazz basketball watching. But we knew, right, after the trade deadline, we talked about how there were going to be some stretches where the Jazz were going to prioritize data collection over that pesky little scoreboard thing. And that's what we're seeing. There were definitely some stretches where the young guys competed a little bit better, and then there were games that were where they just didn't have it, right? Houston comes to mind, an absolute massacre. Visiting the Rockets, a game in which the Jazz couldn't defend the paint at all early on, and then they couldn't seem to stop Fred VanVleet and Jalen Green from hitting outside shots, all of which prompted some pretty dire declarations from certain corners of the internet. The one that caught my eye was a former Jazz beat writer, who I like, by the way, but who said that he's never seen a mess like this in covering the Jazz before. That's probably hyperbolic, even if he meant just the on-the-court piece, right? The fact that the Jazz are struggling to defend, they're struggling to do some pretty simple things on the basketball court right now because they're relying on players who don't have a lot of NBA experience. But if that's what that comment meant, just the on-the-court piece of things, then I sort of get it. If the comment was referring to the overall state of things with the Jazz, then I think it's just objectively a bit melodramatic, and here's why. In all of the previous Jazz rebuilds, there's never been a point in any Jazz rebuild where they have been in a position where they have had all of these things all at once. They have at least 12 and as many as 15 first-round draft picks in the next 7 drafts, a literal all-star, not a possible potential future one, but a real-life person who has been in an NBA all-star game, 4 guys still in the first half of their rookie contracts, $40 million in salary cap flexibility for the upcoming summer, and 3 recent 20-point-per-game scorers, all on sub-max deals, 2 of whom are still in their mid-20s. Now, I do get it. All of that stuff only really matters if they find a way to turn some portion of it into another bona fide star and more likely 2 to play alongside Lauri Markkanen. So for Doug on Twitter, who asked me to talk about the what's next aspect of things, that's it. That's the whole thing. Until that happens, there will likely continue to be really painful stretches for the Jazz. Now, there are a few ways that can happen. One of these guys that we've talked about could develop into a bona fide star. The Jazz could draft someone with one of those 12 to 15 upcoming draft picks and realize that guy's star potential. Or at some point, they could take some of those picks, some of that cap flexibility, and probably a vet and or a couple of young guys and acquire a star level player or a near star level player that they think has another level in him, which is what they basically did with Lauri Markkanen. Now, my guess is that the Jazz already have some ideas on how they might start doing that, potentially as early as this offseason. And if those options pan out, the next year could be a year where they start the next phase of the process and kind of start the ascent. But if nothing like that is available, if there are no difference makers that shake loose to Utah, then probably what you're doing going forward is you're probably giving guys like Keontae George and Colin Sexton more chances to climb to legit stardom. And if that doesn't pan out right away, then honestly, there's a scenario where we might have more painful nights and weeks ahead next season as well. I hope not. I hope that something meaningful happens and that combined with continued player growth makes next season less of a science experiment than this season has been at times. But you know how all the narratives suggest that the Jazz brass just sort of wantonly took a sledgehammer to a competitive, relevant Jazz team? It's not really super true. It felt like it when they were winning a bunch of close games in January, but here's a little secret about this year's Jazz. The season started on October 25th, right? By November 25th, 1 month in, they were the 24th ranked team in net rating. 2 months in, they were 25th. 3 months in, they were 23rd. 4 months in, they were 22nd. And now, today, on the 5-month mark of the season, they're 23rd in net rating. So yeah, there was a stretch when they were winning some unbudgeted games. There were also 2 stretches where they couldn't seem to get out of their way. If you zoom out to the macro view, the Jazz have been roughly the same thing all year. And at some point, it's kind of a mistake to cling to this when you could instead embrace all of this and the opportunity that it represents. And let's circle back to those picks, because another Twitter follower, DJM, asked for an overview of exactly what the Jazz have as of today in that department. So let's look at that. So in the next 7 years, the Jazz will own all of their own first-round picks, except for one, barring other trades. We just don't know which one that is yet. So the Jazz do have an outstanding debt to Oklahoma City, which has to be a first-round pick, but it is protected in each of the 3 next seasons. Now, it looks as though the Jazz are trending to keep that pick this year in the top 10, so I'm assuming that that one is not going to convey in 2024. But if it doesn't, then the 2025 pick is protected in the top 10, and in 2026 it is protected in the top 8. Now, there is a chance that it could be protected in all 3 years, and Oklahoma City would never get that pick from Utah. I'm sort of not rooting for that, because it would mean that we will have been through a pretty protracted period of not winning a lot of games. So unless the Jazz finish in the top, in the bottom 10, bottom 8 in the next 3 seasons, at some point a pick is going to Oklahoma City. The Jazz also own their own picks in 27, 28, 29, and 30. Then they have an extra pick coming to them this year. It's the lesser of 4 teams, but mathematically it can only be OKC or the Clippers. As of right now, it looks pretty likely that it's going to be OKC's pick, currently slated to be the 28th pick in the draft. Next year, they own Minnesota's first unprotected and Cleveland's first unprotected. Same in 2027, when they also own the Lakers pick, as long as it's not a top 4 pick. 2027 is a big year for the Jazz draft-wise. In 2029, they own Cleveland's first unprotected and Minnesota's first, as long as it's not a top 5 pick. Now in 2026, if they do own that pick, if they have not had to convey that pick to Oklahoma City, then they can actually swap that with whichever of Minnesota or Cleveland has the best draft position of the 3 teams. It's a 3-way swap right. Could be pretty valuable if something wacky happens in one of those 2 cities. But it only is valid if the Jazz own their own pick. It's one of the reasons why coming into this season, I thought that the Jazz might prioritize satisfying that debt in 24 or 25 so that they would not mess with that unprotected or with that 3-way swap right in 26. But at some point, if it, like we said, with the Jazz being 22nd to 25th in net rating all year, at some point, if it looks like your own pick is going to be a high enough pick that it is worth more than what that 3-way swap right might yield, then, at some point that takes precedence. So we'll see what happens with the 2026 swap right. And then in 2028, the Jazz also have the ability to swap their pick with the Cavs if the Cavs have a higher draft position. Not a ton of seconds. The Jazz own 2 of their own seconds in this window. They also have an extra second this year that will almost surely be Washington's pick, the 31st or the 32nd pick in the draft. Technically could also be Memphis's, but only until they win another game or Washington loses another game, and then it's mathematically certain to be Washington's second rounder. They also have a couple of those protected first-round picks that could convert to a second if it falls in that narrow protected range. So overall, where does that leave the Jazz? Well, they own at least 6 of their own firsts, plus they have 6 guaranteed first-round picks coming from other teams. 6 picks that are either unprotected or they're the lesser of, so they're guaranteed to convey. So they, bare minimum, will have 12 draft picks in the next 7 drafts, plus potentially 2 more, because that Laker pick and the Minnesota 29 are lightly protected and highly likely to convey. And then they have that 1 Jazz pick that if things, if they stay in the protected range, in each of the next 3 seasons, they might never have to send that pick to OKC and they'd get another pick back. So somewhere between 12 and 15 first-round picks. All right, that'll do it for this week. Again, I get it, not a fun week, but the point here is that the Jazz are in a position that they've never been in before in any of their prior rebuilds. What will it yield? I don't know. We don't know yet. That's the fun part. But thanks for listening along with me while we talked about it. Read on or click over to saltcityhoops.com to catch the rest of the Salt City 7, the written portions of the Salt City 7. This has been The Big Question, part of the Salt City 7 here at saltcityhoops.com. Thanks.